Okay, so tell me where you're at. How you been?
Not good.
In what way?
Um, I think I've taken a few steps back.
Okay, that's
Um,
okay. That well, you know what that tells me is you weren't really the steps forward anyways. The
okay.
reality of your recovery that we're going through was not full and complete anyways. It was conditional. That makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's okay. Sometimes you need to experience the conditions that you go backwards in so that you can see that those are the conditions we have to go in and open up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of like where have you regressed or in your viewpoint? Or
And everything.
okay, so when was the last time you binged?
Last night.
And did you purge?
Yes.
Okay, so what does that tell me about how you feel about your weight?
That I don't want to gain weight.
Correct. That's it. There you have it. In what what you must have started gaining weight at some point to where you're like, or we did talk about where you were like, oh, I didn't gain weight, and you were like excited about that. There's at some point you felt like your weight became important again.
Yes. I feel like I was doing. I feel like I was going. I was walking out of that health. Um, and then I don't really know what happened.
Well, your weight became important at some point. It doesn't matter. Your weight became important again. There was a condition around your weight. The binging and purging aspect is not the issue, right? Can you see that? Are you seeing that clearly? You do? That's what you need to do when you're dieting, right? If you're being really restrictive with food, can you see why that would, because you're trying to lose weight or trying not to gain weight, right? Because that's the only reason you would restrict food, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if you're doing that, if you're really strict about it, what's the likelihood you're going to binge?
Very likely.
100%. If you're going to purge, what's the likelihood your binge is going to be massive? 100%. Totally. So do you see how that side to me is like, oh, we don't even need to talk about that. That's not the issue. You wouldn't be doing any of it if you were forgiving with your weight, right? So for example, if you didn't have to restrict today, if you didn't have to lose weight today, if your weight had no relevance today, what's the likelihood you would binge today?
None.
0. You got it. So why is your weight so important?
I don't know.
Well, you do. You do know. You do know.
Is there like
Say that again?
I feel.
Oh, go ahead.
I feel ashamed
About what?
of like what I did last night when, like I should really be ashamed about like not wanting to gain weight.
Why would you feel ashamed? Where do you think that shame comes from?
Like a feeling ashamed of like bingeing and purging.
But don't you agree that that's the most forgivable part of this process? Because if anybody would do that, I did that, right? When you're that desperate to be thin.
Yeah.
So is that not forgivable to you? Right? Don't you agree that anybody who is that desperate to be thin would, if they're going to be that intense about it? The more intense someone is about wanting to be thin, or that fear of gaining weight, if you have that much fear of gaining weight, who wouldn't restrict that intensely? Are you connecting with what I'm saying in any way?
Like I am, like understanding what you're saying. I just don't know how to. I just don't understand. Like why I can't
just stay with me. I'm trying to help you right now. Just stop with your own crazy train. Just listen to me. Okay?
Okay.
Don't you agree it's understandable? Anybody who feels that intense about being thin would restrict that intensely. And those small mistakes would trigger a binge, especially if you're going to purge.
Yes.
Don't you agree that's the easiest part of this? That right there, that's easy to understand. Is that easy to understand?
Yes.
Yeah, and don't you agree that's like so forgivable? And if any human being holding themselves to that the strictness of being thin, they have to hold on to dieting. And they have to be strict with dieting. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Yeah. Why would someone hold on to hold on to thinness and clutch onto it that intensely?
Well, it's like it just feels like too out of control.
Well, they don't feel. You mean being overweight feels too out of control?
No, like having that kind of freedom just feels.
I asked you what type of freedom. I'm asking that why would someone hold on to their thinness that intensely?
Why would someone hold on? Because it's like I see it as who I am.
Well, you don't think you can handle life without it. Of course you think the thinness is how you've identified the narcissism. That what you just described as narcissism. That's my identity. But in reality, this is what I do because I don't think I can this is the one thing that gives me a sense like it can handle life. Like if I'm thin, I can handle life. So it's a weird sense of like, I need thinness to live because I can't handle. There's a feeling that's there that says I cannot handle life without it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Is would you say, I mean, don't just agree with me. I need you to like participate with me on this one. Does that match for you? Because if it doesn't, I want to know.
Like, I don't know how to else, like, I don't know another way to live my life.
Yeah, you don't have to have another knowing to live. You just live. You know, you don't have to have that, but that is the way you think. That's misdirected. I don't believe what you just said. That's not actually relevant. You do not think you can handle life without being thin. Without being thin, you don't think you can handle it. It's not worth it. Life isn't worth it. Right? So how is life being thin for you?
From the inside out, miserable.
Yeah, if you had to tell people the truth of what it's like for you, what would you say?
It's not worth it.
Do you really have a life?
No.
Mm-mm. Oh. All because you're not willing to let it go. You know? So what happened when you did let it go?
When I did let it go, I experienced a sense of freedom that I hadn't before.
Mm-hmm. So you do know something different. You do know something different. There is something different.
Yeah,
you've experienced it. It's easy.
Yeah, kind of like what I was trying to say before is like when people are abused and then they are afraid, or they're slaves and then they're afraid and they don't know how to like live, so they go back.
Yeah, it's called battered wife syndrome or Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're experiencing is Stockholm syndrome. You're holding yourself hostage to a horrible situation out of just not feeling you can handle it.
Yes.
Yeah. So is it really worth it? Which worse?
No.
What's worse? What's worse? Not handling, being able to be free, or handling misery?
No. This is misery. This is misery. Like what I went back into.
It's horrible, isn't it?
It is.
Oh, it's the worst. I was willing to commit suicide. It's that bad. Horrible. Once again, when you went to IOP, won't you agree? They have no idea how bad this is. They have no clue. They don't even know what they're doing. You can run circles around them and they wouldn't even know it. They're clueless. Don't you agree too? You have to be willing to gain weight, and don't you agree that is it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you're not, or if you're willing to gain weight but only temporarily, what happens?
this.
Yeah, I know. So it has to be
What
permanent.
happened?
Yeah, you go back into a cycle. That's what I call it. You're going around in cycles. It's not like, what's the big deal? You've been through a bazillion of these, right? Is it really that much bad? Is it bad that you went through a few more cycles?
Well, I feel, I guess this is where like the narcissism comes in, because I feel like I've let people down.
Who?
I
Who have
feel
you let down?
like the people that are looking up to me.
No, no, no. Well, that's super narcissistic. They look up to you like you're superior. Aren't you allowed to just, can you afford to play that game?
Can I afford? No.
So you might want to just be real.
Well, that's like what I'm saying. Like that's something that I haven't wanted to admit, but it's I don't want to talk to anybody right now. I didn't even want to talk to you.
Well, you and I should have talked a long time ago. For whatever reason, you're wasting your money. Why would you talk to me only when you feel good? I mean, these sessions are meant for this. I'm so good at this right here. This is it. This is what I mean, honest to God. This is recovery. And you didn't want my help. This is your lesson. You just needed to suffer some more. Did I ever say that to you before? Oh, you might need to suffer some more. A lot of people go through more cycles because they just don't want to surrender, right? They want to play God more for some reason. You know? Suffering is, don't you agree, that's what's brought you to this place. That's what's brought you to reaching out to get help. How many more times do you need to pretend to be something you're not before you suffer worse? You know? So when people get into recovery, like in this process that I'm working people through, it's not uncommon. You know how many times I've seen this? 80% of the time. People get a temporary pause, and it is awesome. It is so awesome. Because for the first time, you're like, holy shit, I don't have that incessant need to binge. I don't care. I'm eating these foods. It's not affecting me. It's really kind of quite miraculous, but you're not quite getting it. But you took pride in it, right? The pride is the inflation of it. So it becomes inflating. Not because that's what I'm telling you to do, but that's what you naturally did. And what happens when you're where you're at in reality, in the process of reality and recovery, which means you put a pause on your desire to lose weight. You didn't stop it altogether. You just paused it. Would you agree there's a benefit to that pause on your desire to be thin?
Yes,
It gave you that it gave you temporary experience of recovery, didn't it?
Yes.
So, can you imagine if that was it? And you're like, when you look back at this process, was that really it? Was that all it took?
Is that all it takes?
Yeah, it's temporary pause to recover.
No.
Now you're realizing, okay, yeah, no, it has to be permanent.
It has to be permanent.
Yep. So what is a permanent freedom from your weight feel like? When it is permanent, meaning for the rest of the life that this body is giving you, it is irrelevant what size and weight it is forever. There is no benefit to being thinner. There is no loss to being fatter. It's irrelevant all around. Permanently until the day this body is done. Tell me how that would feel.
It would feel good.
Is that it?
Yeah, it would feel like what I have experienced, but just permanently.
And grander, because you never really fully surrendered your desire to be thinner or the beliefs around thinness is better. You didn't surrender any of that. You kept your belief that thinner is always better. You kept all of that. You never got rid of all that, right? You just put a pause on it, so because you really were hopeful and willing and wanting this process to work, right? So you put a pause on it. You never really question the belief. Are thinner people really better people?
No.
Well, and even then, are people who are thinner and think that they're better people, are they better people? Because that's a whole other class of people, isn't it? I'm thinner and I'm better. That would be the category you're in. Right? They're better. Look at them. They're thinner and better. Is that really better?
No, given what I have to go through, what I have to put my body through.
Well, not only that, but isn't that kind of isn't that looking at life through a tiny straw at one thing? So you don't see anything else but thinness, and that's all their life's about. Look at it that way too. That's what you think makes your life better. That's pretty much all you look at. That's all you're seeing things. That's your whole vantage point of life. Is that? Can you see then why, if that was the case, you would have an eating disorder? Yeah. So you can also attach that to that group of people who think that they're better or other people are better when they're thinner. You can attach the eating disorder that goes along with that. Right? You know how I just did another session before you where we were talking about it, like the Mad Hatter, that table in Alice in Wonderland with the Mad Hatter, the cuckoo, crazy train.
Yeah.
That's the table you're sitting at. Just think about that for a second. Thinking it's better and safer than going out. Make sense? So the only way for you to leave that table is to accept what?
That I'm going to gain weight.
Yeah. Yes. Because what you have to do to be thin requires you sit at the Mad Hatter's table. I want you to think about that. You wanted to be thin, so you went back to the table. You did. And you're like, oh, I just can't do this. Well, you could. You just have to make it permanent that you would rather be overweight than to go back to that goddamn table. It becomes a choice and it becomes a permanent choice. And that's what you were missing, was the permanence. It was a temporary pause. Well, while still holding on to the beliefs and ideals that thin people are superior, right? And I want what they get. So how can you permanently leave the table of the crazy thin sketchos, right? If you're not willing to gain weight, how can you leave the crazy table? Do you see that?
I do. I see it. And I was there. I was.
For a second.
For a second.
But not really. Just keep in mind, you weren't. You left thinking that you could do this and that maybe you wouldn't gain weight. Like you were holding on to all sorts of hopes and desires not to gain weight. Just think about that. Tell yourself the truth. Did you really let it go?
That's what I'm thinking as we're talking. It's it's true. And I attached to the fact that I haven't.
And what happened? Now you got to keep that. And where do you get to hang out? Freaking. Yeah. Yes. So has it really been a failure? Or should you pretend that you recovered fully when you recovered temporarily.
Yeah, no, it was
Yeah.
temporarily.
Yeah, and don't you
feel like
agree it was understandable because you weren't fully grasping the severity of issues that come from wanting to be thinner. Like you didn't quite grasp that aspect of this. You knew you got out the direction I told you. I said, go this route, you'll be out. You went out, but then you were like, oh, I could be thinner. And then what happened?
Yeah, I went out and I ate stuff that I haven't eaten. And the fear was that I was going to be 300 pounds. And I'm not. If anything, I started like getting, I was able to fit into those jeans, and I was getting compliments from people.
And then what happened?
That I looked really good, and I'm like, so.
And then you said, I like that. I'd rather suffer to keep it. And you went right back to the crazy train. Right?
Yeah. Because if anything, like I've lost. If anything, like I've like lost weight. Eating, like I found myself saying the other day, like I should be 300 pounds given what I've been eating.
Yeah, well, that's just a sign that the diet industry is a bunch of baloney. However, your desire to be thinner has created a lot of problems, hasn't it?
Yes.
So fuck that. You haven't gained weight eating food. The diet industry is a bunch of lies and fraud and fear and crazy. Okay, that's irrelevant to your recovery at this point. Because you're still binging and purging, and it doesn't matter about what you're eating at this point. You're still doing everything you can to keep your thinness. And you went, and it's worse. Paranoia gets worse when you lose this type of weight. Have you noticed it's worse? Do you really want it if it comes with this? Do you really want it?
No, I don't.
So part of this recovery process for people is seeing getting clarity and really trying to understand what it's going to take for permanence. So you being sucked in with the narcissistic desires of thin supremacy sucked you back in and made it worse. So is it really that you're not in recovery or not recovering or it's not working, or it's just you didn't realize what you need to realize to make it permanent?
Yeah. No, it's me.
There's so much you just didn't really have clarity with. So the good news is recovery exists. You had no clue before. Didn't know what it was, didn't know what it felt like. Guess what? You know what it is and you know what it feels like. That's beneficial. Now we have to go, well, how did you get there in the first place? Well, I told you to accept you will be 300 pounds forever. And you did. Until you wanted to keep your thinness, then what happened?
And then it all just came back.
Yeah. So it's not just accept obesity, right? It's accept that the body is going to manage itself. And do you really, really want to make it important? Do you want your weight to be important?
No.
So how can you make this go away now?
Like being willing to gain weight.
And willing to not care if you don't gain weight.
Being willing to not care if I don't gain weight.
Yeah, or if you gain weight and then lose weight. Or if you don't lose weight, but you stay the same and then gain later, but then lose it again. Like, do you really want to give a shit? In any angle, at any angle. So recovery is number one, except that you'll never be thinner than this. Okay, these are points of recovery. First point, you'll never be thinner than this. You could absolutely, you have to accept the body you're in at the moment, right? So for people who are 200 pounds, they have to accept they're never going to be 150, and they're going to have to accept 200 pounds and what it requires. Third is that you could get bigger, right? You and I went right there. You could. If you want to get off of that Mad Hatter crazy train, get away from that insanity, if you want to get out of the white room with padded walls, you might want to be okay gaining weight. Because the only reason why you chose to be in that space is to be thin.
But I feel like I kind of like tricked myself.
That's the three. There's more. So those are 3 points. So the fourth point is you have to not care if you lose weight. Because if you care or get high or get off, you are so screwed. Because that means that you actually believe in thin supremacy still. Even if you're giving yourself grace to gain, if you believe that by being thinner, there's something improving, you still are not recovered. So that's 4. So the first point, you'll never be thinner. Second point, you accept where you're at. Third point, you accept you could gain. Fourth point, you don't care if you lose. You don't care. You don't attach to any type of grandeur. And then number 5 is if you do lose, you could always regain at any point. So you see how that kind of hits everything from all faces. Yeah. That, my dear, is recovery. So do you really want to care about your weight? Really?
No, but that's where I feel like I'm taking the responsibility for this, but that's how I feel like where I was like, I fooled myself.
You inflated your recovery thinking that you were all good because you're willing to gain, not realizing that if you lose and you still hold this idea of thin supremacy, you are so screwed, and it gets worse.
Yeah.
It's worse. Ready for that. No, it's bad. It is anorexia. That's your anorexia coming out. That's the true narcissist that was in there the whole time. Yeah. It's bad. It's so much worse. Wow. Wouldn't you rather be? I mean, honestly, it's so much worse.
Yeah. No. I feel like I had I look at myself and like I'm like a warrior, and I was ready. I was ready, willing to gain all this weight, and I was going there. And then I didn't realize that the opposite would happen, and that I would attach to it.
But that's what that was the truth of what was actually existing in the first place. And don't you agree? Just think about this. Don't you agree? In order for anybody to fully recover, they have to not give an ounce of pleasure to thinness. That is the heart and soul of the problem. Yeah. And but the whole thing has to be done from every angle. I have to be okay gaining. I have to be okay not losing. I have to be okay staying the same. I got to be okay losing and then gaining. All of it has to be accepted. I would never want to get any sort of benefit from being thinner. Ever. I don't want someone liking me for that dumb reason. That is so fucking juvenile. Right? Honestly, do you want people to like you because of your thinness?
No.
Doesn't that just sound terrible? Yeah, but that's what you got off on, was the compliments.
Yeah.
Do you really want compliments? Do you, like, it went in, you let it go in. Oh, that's right. I'm thinner. I'm winning the anorexia competition. That is anorexia. Anorexia is so narcissistic, so competitive. Who's thinner than who? It's so nasty. Karma's a bitch, isn't it? It came back, but it's never went away. So the willingness to gain is one side, but the willingness to not get off on thinness, that's recovery. Even if you could be thinner, do you really want this? Do you really want it? If your answer inside is yes, you have a lot more suffering to do. It's true. It's not that you're not capable of recovering. You're just not willing to give up the thinness. So you can accept, at that point, what I suggest for people is you need to accept the narcissism and the hell that you get from it. Don't complain. And don't tell people you didn't recover. You have the option at all times. You're choosing not to. It's a choice. If you want thin supremacy, accept help. You cannot, that's what you get. Don't complain, and you might want to stop telling people you have an eating disorder because you really don't. You have narcissism. Make sense? Because you're getting off on it. And it's a choice. Would you be willing to, first off, give up your thinness that you've just achieved? Would you really, are you okay getting rid of it?
Yes.
Was that truthful?
I feel like that's where I'm at.
Okay, so that's, you're willing to gain weight.
I have been.
Okay, tell me how that feels.
I feel like it's I don't know.
Okay, are you willing to gain weight?
I've been here before.
No, I need you to talk in the present moment. Just talk from now.
I am, like, I feel, okay, so there's like a part of me that wants to say that what you want to hear.
I know, and that's why I question you're telling the truth, because I don't want you to do that. What's the point of that? What's that going to do? So tell me the goddamn truth.
But
That's what I'm asking for.
Want that. Like, I should want that.
I want you to tell me the truth. Are you willing to gain weight?
I am willing, but I don't want to.
That doesn't make any sense.
I know.
So tell the truth. Are you willing to gain weight? I don't want to talk to your mind. I want to talk to the crazy train, the one sitting at the fucked up table.
Yeah.
Are you? Because that's really what's running the show here. Yeah. Are you willing to gain weight to get freedom from that table? It's important you tell
I want the freedom more.
Really? So tell yourself the truth. Are you, because this isn't about me. This isn't about me. I don't need you to recover for me to be okay with myself.
Yeah.
I've recovered. If you don't, that's none of my goddamn business. It's not my job. You're the one who has to do this for yourself. I can't make you do it. I don't hold any ownership of or claim to what's going on here. Right? And you know it. This is all you. So tell yourself the truth. I'm just trying to help you be honest. Are you willing to gain weight permanently, forever? What's the truth?
No.
I knew it. So why did you see why you're not going to recover until and that's why you will not recover, because you don't want to. You don't. You want thinness. And so how can you get recovery if you're not willing to gain weight? How can you free your mind if you are not willing to gain weight? If you're not willing to gain weight, your whole mind has to fixate on your weight. This is the point you have absolutely never done. You have never done it. You have never actually accepted permanently. You've never done this. Don't you agree? This is the point at which you run away at all times. This is why you're purging. That's why you purge. That feeling right there. The feeling that answered that question is the truth of where you're at. So all the other stuff going on is all, it's really can go so far, right? If the truth in your heart is the answer you gave me, which is no, I'm not willing to gain any weight. Can you see why all of this is just, it can only go so far. It only goes so far. And then that's it. It cannot get beyond that. Even if the potential is massive, it is limited by that feeling right there. Did what I say make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is it. That's your cap. So any progress you've made so far, you can expect to be capped by that. I recognize that in my own recovery when I went through this. I can only go as far as my willingness to. So if I want to recover, I can't want recovery and refuse to gain weight. It just, those two it doesn't work. So everything I'm doing is basically kind of like faking it out, or it's like I'm just trying to, I don't know what. For me, it was like I'm just lying to myself and others, like, oh yeah, I'm so much better, but I know I'm not. I'm faking it. It's like fake. The truth is, I'm not willing, and that means I suffer some more. The suffering gets worse. Because the truth is, I'm not willing to gain weight, and I'm going to get high as a kite if I lose weight, which is the narcissism that underlies the whole thing. That animal in you, that's in everyone, gets fed. And it demands more food, it wants more thinness. And how can you recover if you're not willing to let it go? I really want you to think about this. Is it possible for someone to recover their life with that type of desire and want to be thin?
Well, it's obviously not.
Well, just go into your own experience within, hold that thought in your mind. If I have this desire or want to be thin, do I get the freedom of not having to think about food and not being, feel like a bad when I eat certain food, and not feeling restricted and not thinking about, I just destroyed. And then the compensation through purging, do you get freedom from any of that? Is it, it's a lot, it's just like you're kidding yourself, or you're in denial about that truth. Is it even possible? Don't you agree that there's always hope, that there's possibility, that I can be thin and gratify that self-centered survival need with it, and I can be free too? Don't you agree that's the illusion you're chasing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. Why doesn't it exist? Do you know why is it that is impossible? It doesn't exist.
For me, it just doesn't,
Because your desire to be thinner requires that you obsess around your dieting?
Yeah.
Yeah. See what I mean? So don't you agree the only thing keeping you from recovery is the fact that you're unwilling to look at life if you had to gain weight? You've just never really opened yourself up to it realistically. You have temporarily as a concept, but underneath it all, no, you've never done it. Make sense?
Yeah.
So what would happen if you actually opened yourself up to that option?
Then I will experience that freedom permanently, right?
Yeah, you would. You just have to be actually open to it. And if it is, if your body is meant to be heavier, you are willful. I would rather. I'd sign a contract right now that I guarantee I'm going to gain 50 pounds if it meant I'm free. Because 50 pounds of weight, that's like feathers compared to the weight of what I'm doing. I mean, that's the truth. So would you be willing? I mean, go there again. Are you willing to gain weight?
I am. I am.
Okay, so that why did all of a sudden your answer change?
Because I want recovery.
Freedom.
I want freedom. I do.
So you'd have to be in your heart okay with it, obesity. Are you okay with that? Could you be okay with that if that's the cost?
How do we do that? Like, how do I do that?
Well, you think about it. You actually put yourself there. What if the way my body is going to be naturally, without restrictions, without dieting, without anything, is naturally going to be 50 pounds heavier? Go to 300 pounds. Feel it out. What would life be like in a 300-pound body, especially that you're free from caring about it? You don't have to fix it. If you don't have to fix it, what does that mean? What does that bring you? What does that give you? If you can go up to 300 pounds and you don't have to fix it, compare that to being your weight now and living the way you are now. Which one would you rather?
Freedom.
I want you to go back into that question again, and I want you to answer it again. It's the 300-pound body, or being it thin the way you are with what you're living in to keep it that way.
I don't want this.
Yeah, but people are not. People are not gonna think that you're cool anymore and special. They're gonna think you're a failure.
Oh, they don't really know what's going on.
No, they don't. Don't you agree? You're kind of living as a failure right now?
Yeah.
In your thin supremacy of I have to stay thin. Isn't that just total failure?
Yeah.
Because it's so miserable. Like it's not worth it. You're miserable. Right? Do you really need to be told why you should get out? Do you really need to be convinced that you should gain weight? Does that make sense? Should we have to just pry your fingers off of your thinner body because it's so awesome? Should you have to be convinced to accept weight gain?
That's ridiculous.
Well, because you're so fucking miserable.
Yeah.
And you're thinner. Oh my God. She must be so happy.
No, it's more like, look, guys, I'm eating everything I want and I'm thinner. You can do it too.
You can do it too. You can be thin like me. You can do it too. You hear it? You hear the narcissism in that and the superiority in that? Look at me. All the while I'm lying to you, I am binging and purging still, and I'm actually worse than I was before. Look at me. I am so recovered. You learning something?
I am.
Good.
I'm learning the depth of this narcissism. I really, I've been, like I was just looking in front of me, and I really wasn't looking behind or the sides.
Or at yourself.
Or at myself.
Never looked at yourself as the source of the problem. That desire to be superior, you ever think that might be your issue?
No.
You think that might be what you need to surrender? What if you're forever going to be inferior? What if everybody's going to think, look, she couldn't do it. She couldn't do it. She's totally getting wet. She's totally getting fat. She's totally gaining weight.
Yeah.
You going to be okay when they think that?
I can't control what they think. They can think whatever.
Well, yeah. I mean, but you know the truth
like
that
right now,
you.
Jimmy's the fucking bitch. You know?
Yeah, the fact that you're promoting the thinness.
Nicer when she's fat.
Do you see why it's worse for you? Like why this got bad, real bad? You think there might be some karma involved right now, with you pretending to be superior with recovery?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you rather be overweight?
Real, right? I'd rather be real.
Well, you'd actually have to be, it's like being like you're lying to people. So they're going to find out. You got to be able to say, I was lying to you. I was taking the anorexia and blowing it up with a recovery process.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened.
Sick and twisted. It gets worse. You want to keep on going?
It gets worse. Yeah.
You're not the only one.
It reminds me a lot of my recovery in that age, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's sick and twisted. And you're playing the same game of narcissism, and you wonder why you're all miserable people still in your own other recovery. It's like no one's really recovered. They're just pretending to. They're proselytizing and preaching recovery when they clearly are still suffering in a darkness.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was like the first 4 years in AA. I was, like they say, restless, irritable, and discontented. Because I hadn't really surrendered. Like everything on the outside was good, but inside I was a fucking mess. I was sicker. I got sicker in AA without a drink.
Well, yes, of course, because it's not about the alcohol.
No, and it wasn't until I was really like ready, like to surrender, that my life changed, and I feel like this is kind of like what's happening again. Like everything on the outside is looking good, but inside I'm still fucking miserable.
Yeah.
And then last night was just an example, like just again, like evidence. Here's more evidence that what I'm doing is not working.
Yeah, and you're the one that has to give it up. You're the one that says my way's better. That's why it's like this isn't working. No, it does. You don't work. You're the one that's fucking everything up. Not this system works fabulous. You're not doing it. You're doing everything but what I've told you to do. You're not accepting your weight. You're not indifferent about it. You want the thinness more than anything, and don't complain about you got to see those two hand in hand. If that's what you're going to do, you get to suffer. Do not pretend like you have a problem. No, you have a consequence with what you're doing. You need to accept it. Either that or stop doing what you're doing and go into vulnerability. You know, go into vulnerability. Well, you've got to go there. If you're not willing to go into this space of not knowing, it's like, but I don't know what to do. Yep. Wouldn't you rather not know what to do than to do what you've been doing and know what to do? I don't know if that made any sense. Did it make any sense to you?
Yeah, like go into it blindly, not really knowing what to do, because it will work itself out versus having to have the answers.
Yeah.
Control.
And getting what you exactly. Getting what you've got out of it, which is this. At some point, not knowing is such a better situation.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, vulnerability, that's cake. Being criticized, that's so much easier. I could handle criticism all day long. It's so easy. What you've been doing, it's worth suicide, in my opinion. That was me. No point of being here. What's the point? What's the point? Is you being thin, is that really the point here? Do you really want that? Is your point? My point is how thin I am. Oh, is that really what you want? Look at me. I'm eating what I want and I'm losing weight. Does that sound like recovery to you? Sick and twisted. You just twisted it and made it sick. This.
Yeah.
So if you want to get out, you might want to consider, is gaining weight as bad as what you're doing? Is being seen as a liar and a fraud? Which one's worse?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you rather be seen as a liar and a fraud?
Yeah, that's why that's why I'm talking to you.
So
and I will share these videos with people what I've been talking to.
Good. You think that'll...
I'm doing so well.
You know...
But
it's
I
all
want to
about...
make clear, like what you just said, that it's not process. It's the deceitfulness.
Yeah, you're not telling yourself the truth. You're not being honest with yourself. It is deceitfulness. It's narcissism. It's pretending to be something you're not, when in reality you're miserable. It's this whole concept is it really better to be thinner? Is it? When this is what happens? No?
Yeah.
No. So those 5 steps: willingness to let go of anything thinner than this, accepting where you're at. You need to accept and willfully gain weight to whatever it is. You have to stay completely detached from any weight loss and actually reject opinions about it in a beneficial way. It doesn't mean you fight it. It just means it's dismissed. Oh yeah, they think I'm really hot. Whoopty fucking do. I'd rather them appreciate my soul than my body's appearance. And then you could always regain weight at any time. I mean, you have a whole life of a body that's made metabolically to lose and gain, be pregnant and lose and gain every day. Do you really need to manage that? Well, you do if you have to be thinner.
Yeah.
So do you really need to be thinner? Do you really need to keep the thinness that you have right at the moment?
Do I what?
Do you really need to keep the thinness that you're experiencing in the moment? So what needs to happen next?
Well, for starters, I need to be honest with myself.
That's the ticket.
Yeah, about where I'm at.
Yes, and you need to give yourself grace.
And I need to give myself some grace.
Yeah, because you're only going to make progress with what you're willing to do. So I can sit here and say, you've got to be willing to do these 5 things. Well, where are you at in your willingness to do it?
I thought I was there.
Well, you were sorta.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel
For
like
a moment.
whatever video was when I started talking about the genes, I think that was like the crossroads.
Well, yeah,
like I was there.
and I knew, I was like, you don't want to get off on that. Wouldn't you rather gain the weight back and have bigger jeans? I remember saying that too.
Yeah.
And you didn't
I
catch
like
it.
I was at that crossroads. I don't know what video, I don't know what mission it was, but I put on those fucking jeans and I went another way.
Well, you got off on it. You were already there. So I need you to see that. It had nothing to do with the jeans. It had to do with what was already there.
Yeah.
Do you really want the benefit that you've been getting? Because this is the key. Do you really want the benefits of your thin supremacy? If it comes with all this baggage.
No.
So then you got to say, even if I were to be thin forever, I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't put it on my resume. I wouldn't proselytize it. I wouldn't demonstrate it. I wouldn't put it on a pedestal. I would completely ignore it. And I'd be willing to gain weight at all times if that's what's going to happen. That's how I've never relapsed. I've never, ever. Why would anybody do that voluntarily? Why would you go back into something so special when you come out of it? Fully, completely. You never really came out of it. You need to know that. You never really fully came out of it. You just had a temporary experience because you gave yourself a temporary condition in that state or in that moment. But the truth came back, right? Because you never really fully accepted the process, like fully, like signed a contract with your soul, permanence, right? It's like you have to sign a permanent contract that the soul that I have will never again attach to anything with the body, whether it's beneficial or negative. I will not attach to either. If I'm alive, if the body I'm in is conscious, that's really all I need. I don't need disapproval from it. I don't need approval for it. I don't need any of it. I don't care. If I'm in a body that is providing me consciousness, that's all I need from it. Opinions here or there about it are irrelevant. With that, what would happen to this entire shit show? What would happen?
It was just like
it vanishes like poof. And then what happens to your life? What happens to life in that moment?
Then it's enjoyable.
It's huge. It is infinite. Infinity. Life becomes like infinity. It's humongous because you no longer are self-centered. The center is now open. That's what happens. The moment you don't care anymore, the willingness to completely identify from your awareness, from your life, just life. You identify by the life source that you're experiencing. What happens to the need for your body to be a certain condition?
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't that just seem irrelevant?
Yeah.
Why would the condition of the body matter if the body's condition is providing consciousness on its own without you have nothing to do with that?
Yeah.
Why do you need to take the consciousness and then turn it in and cannibalize your own life that the body's providing you? Shouldn't it go outward? Okay, I'm going to go.